"I'm sorry, ma'am," the wedding coordinator whispered as she avoided looking directly at me. But that seat arrangement came directly from the bride. I stood in the center of the reception tent holding my silver clutch so tightly my fingers had gone numb. Around me, crystal chandeliers glowed softly beneath flowing white fabric while a string quartet played near the dance floor. Guests in expensive suits and pastel dresses laughed over champagne glasses as servers carried trays of lobster appetizers and miniature crab cakes through the crowd. It should have been one of the happiest days of my life. My son Ryan was getting married beneath the golden California sunset at a vineyard in Napa Valley, the kind of place people described as breathtaking in magazines. I had spent weeks convincing myself that maybe things between us were finally improving. Maybe after all the distance, all the awkward phone calls, all the quiet exclusions, this wedding would feel like a fresh beginning. Then I looked down at table 17. Every chair around the table was draped in ivory satin with tiny bouquets tied to the backs. Every chair except mine. In my place sat a large silver trash can covered loosely with a white linen cloth. My place card rested carefully on top of it in elegant gold lettering. Helen Parker, mother of the groom. For a moment, the sound around me disappeared. The music faded. The conversations blurred into a dull hum. I simply stared at the trash can while my chest tightened so slowly and deeply it almost felt calm. Someone nearby laughed quietly. Another guest pretended not to notice. I heard the faint click of a phone camera somewhere behind me. Then Claire appeared beside me, wearing a fitted white gown that probably cost more than my first car. Her smile looked polished enough for a toothpaste commercial. "Oh my goodness," she said softly, touching her chest as if she were embarrassed. There must have been some mix-up with the rental company. I looked at her carefully. Claire Dawson never made mistakes. Not once in the 3 years she'd been in my son's life. Every flower arrangement, every dinner reservation, every carefully staged family photograph had always been perfectly controlled. Ryan stepped beside her then, adjusting his tuxedo cufflinks without meeting my eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, "don't make this into a thing tonight, okay?" That hurt more than the trash can. Not because of what he said, but because of how quickly he said it. As if he'd rehearsed it in advance. As if somewhere deep down, he already knew exactly what I'd found waiting for me. I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't want to ruin the wedding." Claire's shoulders visibly relaxed. Ryan gave a quick, grateful nod before guests pulled them away toward the dance floor. And just like that, they left me standing beside the trash can with my name on it. I should tell you something about myself. I'm 68 years old, and I was raised to believe dignity mattered more than volume. My late husband Frank used to say that the loudest person in the room was usually the weakest one. So I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't demand explanations. Instead, I adjusted the navy blue sleeves of the dress Frank bought me before cancer took him 4 years ago, lifted my chin, and quietly sat down beside the trash can while wedding guests avoided looking directly at me. The humiliation wasn't even hidden. That was the worst part. If Claire had screamed at me or insulted me openly, maybe someone would have stepped in. But this was elegant cruelty. Sophisticated cruelty. The kind that allowed everyone to pretend nothing terrible had happened while making sure I understood exactly where I belonged. Or rather, where I didn't. Across the room, Ryan and Claire swayed together during their first dance while soft golden lights reflected against wine glasses and polished silverware. My son looked happy. Truly happy. And for one dangerous second, I wondered if maybe I deserved this somehow. Maybe I had become difficult. Maybe older women slowly turned invisible without realizing it. Maybe mothers eventually became burdens their children learned to tolerate instead of love. Then I looked back at the trash can beside me. No, this wasn't accidental. It wasn't thoughtless. It was deliberate. A message placed directly in front of 200 wedding guests. And as I sat there listening to applause echo through the vineyard while the California evening turned cold around me, something inside me changed forever. Because that was the moment I stopped trying to earn a seat in my own family. I stayed at the wedding for another 2 hours after that. Long enough to watch Ryan cut the cake beside Claire while guests clapped and recorded videos on their phones. Long enough to hear Claire's bridesmaids compliment the floral arrangements I had originally suggested before Claire replaced every white rose with imported orchids because she said roses looked dated. Long enough to realize that not one person at that wedding ever asked why the groom's mother was sitting beside a covered trash can. That was the strange thing about humiliation. Most people saw it clearly. They just preferred comfort over courage. By the time I walked back to my rental car, the vineyard parking lot had grown cold and quiet beneath the evening fog rolling through Napa Valley. My heels clicked softly against the pavement, while distant laughter drifted from the reception tent behind me. I placed my hands on the steering wheel, but did not start the engine right away. Instead, I stared through the windshield and let the silence settle around me. For years earlier, that silence would have terrified me. It had started the morning Frank died. One moment he had been sitting in his favorite kitchen chair reading the newspaper with his coffee beside him. The next moment, the ambulance lights reflected against our front windows while neighbors stood outside pretending not to stare. After 38 years of marriage, grief did not arrive dramatically. It arrived quietly, in empty closets, in untouched coffee mugs, in hearing only one set of footsteps inside a house built for two people. Ryan changed after his father died. At first, I told myself it was normal. He threw himself into work at the investment firm in San Francisco and started calling less often. Holidays became shorter. Sunday dinners disappeared completely. But whenever I mentioned it, Ryan always sounded tired rather than cruel. Work has been crazy lately, Mom. Claire already made plans. We'll come by next weekend. Next weekend slowly became next month. Then sometimes nothing at all. I blamed adulthood. I blamed distance. I blamed myself for expecting too much. Looking back now, I realize Claire understood something long before I did. She understood that isolation does not happen all at once. It happens gradually, politely, in ways that make you question your own instincts. The first Thanksgiving after the engagement, Claire insisted dinner should be hosted at a downtown restaurant because it would feel more modern. She seated me at the far end of the table beside two coworkers from Ryan's office, while she sat between Ryan and her parents beneath the warm glow of hanging lights. When dessert arrived, Claire stood and thanked everyone who helped organize the evening. She thanked the caterer. She thanked the sommelier. She even thanked the valet staff. Then her eyes passed over me completely, like I was part of the furniture. I remember driving home that night wondering why the silence inside my house felt heavier than usual. Another time, I invited them to spend Christmas Eve at the family home Frank and I bought 32 years ago. Claire smiled politely before saying, "Traveling during the holidays is exhausting for us, Helen." 3 days later, Emma accidentally posted photographs online from Claire's family cabin in Lake Tahoe. Ryan looked relaxed in every picture. Happy, included. I was the only person missing. Even then, I still defended them. That was the embarrassing part. I defended them to neighbors, to church friends, to myself. I kept rewriting reality because accepting the truth felt unbearable. Somewhere between Frank's funeral and Ryan's wedding, I had stopped being treated like family and started being managed like an obligation. I finally started the engine and pulled out of the vineyard parking lot, while soft jazz played quietly through the car speakers. The road curved through rows of dark grapevines stretching beneath the moonlight like endless shadows. My hands rested calmly on the wheel, but something inside me no longer felt soft or uncertain. Claire thought tonight had put me in my place. Ryan thought silence would keep the peace. But as the vineyard disappeared behind me in the rearview mirror, I realized something neither of them understood yet. People can survive heartbreak surprisingly well. What changes them forever is humiliation. 3 days after the wedding, my house smelled like lemon furniture polish and silence. I spent the morning dusting the living room shelves even though they were already clean. Frank used to tease me about that habit. "You polish the same table 3 times whenever you are upset," he would say while smiling over the sports section of the newspaper. I caught myself looking toward his old recliner before remembering it had been empty for 4 years now. The sunlight coming through the bay windows painted long golden stripes across the hardwood floor, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to sit quietly without turning on the television just to fill the emptiness. That was when my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "We are stopping by this afternoon to discuss a few things about the house. Hope that works." Not asking, informing. I stared at the screen for several seconds before typing back a simple response. Of course. Around 4 o'clock, Ryan's black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Claire stepped out first wearing oversized sunglasses and cream-colored heels completely impractical for my gravel walkway. Ryan followed behind carrying his laptop bag while talking on his phone about investment portfolios and market forecasts. Neither of them hugged me when they came inside. Claire walked slowly through the entryway, glancing around the house the way real estate agents inspect properties before listing them online. "It still smells exactly the same in here," she said casually. "That lavender candle scent." I smiled faintly. "Your father liked lavender." Ryan loosened his tie and finally looked at me. "Mom, we wanted to talk about making things easier for you moving forward." Easier for you. Those 4 words had become strangely popular lately. Doctors used them when discussing aging patients. Salespeople used them while advertising walk-in bathtubs and stair lifts. Adult children used them when they wanted control without sounding cruel. Claire settled onto my cream-colored sofa and crossed her legs carefully. "This house is beautiful, Helen, but honestly, it is a lot for one person." I noticed she never called me mom anymore. She had during the first year she dated Ryan. That disappeared eventually too. "The stairs alone worry me," she continued softly. "And Napa property taxes are getting insane." Ryan nodded immediately. Claire found a really nice retirement community about 20 minutes outside Sonoma. They have fitness classes, wine nights, and medical staff available 24 hours a day. I looked at him quietly. "I am 68, Ryan, not 98. He sighed the same way Frank used to sigh when he was trying to avoid an argument. "Nobody is saying you cannot take care of yourself." But they were. Not directly. Never directly. That was Claire's specialty. She wrapped insults inside concern until objecting made you sound unreasonable. My eyes drifted toward the fireplace mantel lined with framed photographs. Ryan at age 10 holding a baseball glove nearly bigger than his body. Ryan graduating law school while Frank stood proudly beside him. Ryan smiling beside Claire at their engagement dinner. Somewhere between those photographs, I had disappeared from my own son's emotional life without even noticing when it happened. Claire stood and walked toward the dining room. "You still have all the original china cabinets," she observed. "Vintage furniture is becoming valuable again." Something about the way she said valuable made my stomach tighten. "Frank restored those cabinets himself," I replied. "They are not going anywhere." Claire smiled politely without answering. Ryan stepped closer to me and lowered his voice. "Mom, do not make this harder than it needs to be. We are trying to help." There it was again. Help. As though humiliating me publicly at the wedding had been help too. As though replacing my seat with a trash can was somehow part of preparing me for this conversation. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. "Interesting," I said softly. "Because lately your version of helping feels a lot like removing me from my own life one piece at a time." Ryan looked uncomfortable immediately. Claire, however, remained perfectly composed. "Helen," she said gently, "sometimes change is healthier than holding on to things simply because they are familiar." I met her eyes then, truly met them, and for the first time since the wedding, I saw something beneath the polished smile and expensive clothes. Not guilt, not embarrassment, calculation. Claire was not trying to include me in their future. She was organizing a future where I no longer existed inside it. After Ryan and Claire left that evening, the house felt unusually still. Not peaceful, suspended. Like something invisible had shifted inside the walls while I stood there pretending not to notice it. I walked slowly through the kitchen collecting untouched coffee cups and dessert plates from the conversation neither of them had really come to have. They had not visited to spend time with me. They had come to evaluate timelines, possibilities, obstacles. I rinsed Claire's lipstick-marked cup beneath warm water and suddenly remembered another afternoon almost 3 years earlier. Claire had stood in this exact kitchen smiling brightly while asking whether I planned to downsize eventually. At the time, I thought she was making casual conversation. Now I realized she had been studying the future long before I had. I dried my hands carefully and wandered into Frank's old study. The room still smelled faintly of cedarwood and old paper. His leather chair sat near the window exactly where he left it. Some people think grief fades completely with time. That is not true. It simply changes shape. Sometimes grief becomes background noise you barely notice. Other times it returns suddenly through tiny, ordinary details. A jacket hanging behind a door, a familiar song playing in the grocery store, or hearing your son speak to you like a problem that needs managing. I opened the bottom drawer of Frank's desk and found the old family photo albums stacked neatly beside property records and insurance folders. Frank organized everything meticulously. "One day you will thank me for labeling every file," he used to joke. I sat at the desk and opened the oldest album carefully. There was Ryan at age 6 sitting on Frank's shoulders during a 4th of July parade. Another photo showed all three of us camping near Lake Tahoe, smiling beside a crooked little tent we could barely assemble correctly. In every picture, Ryan looked at me with complete trust. Children love so openly when they are young. They do not calculate status or convenience. They simply reach for you whenever they are scared or excited or hurt. I traced my fingers lightly across one photograph from Ryan's college graduation. Frank stood proudly beside him while I adjusted Ryan's tie before the ceremony. We had spent years sacrificing for that degree. Frank worked overtime shifts at the architectural firm. I took bookkeeping jobs from home late into the evenings. We skipped vacations, delayed repairs on the house. There was one winter when our furnace failed during December, and Frank and I slept wearing sweaters beneath heavy blankets, because replacing it immediately would have cut into Ryan's tuition payments. We never regretted any of it. Not once. Because loving your child is supposed to feel larger than sacrifice. But sitting there alone in the study, I realized something painful. Ryan remembered his success. Claire remembered the lifestyle attached to it. But neither of them remembered the cost. My phone buzzed softly against the desk, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text from Emma Brooks. "Are you okay?" I stared at the message longer than I should have. Emma was my cousin's granddaughter, 26 years old, and endlessly observant in ways that made people uncomfortable. She had attended the wedding alone and sat quietly near the back during most of the reception. Unlike everyone else, she had actually looked embarrassed by what happened to me. "I am fine," I typed back automatically. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "No, you are not." I let out a small tired laugh despite myself. A minute later, another message arrived. I heard Claire talking to one of the bridesmaids before the reception started. My fingers paused above the screen. What did she say? Emma responded almost instantly. She said older people ruin the aesthetic in wedding photos if they sit too close to the couple. I read the sentence twice. Not because it shocked me. Somehow it did not. What shocked me was how calm I suddenly felt reading it. The confusion was disappearing now. Piece by piece, memory by memory, the entire picture was becoming painfully clear. Claire had never wanted a relationship with me. She wanted controlled distance wrapped in politeness. She wanted me present enough to appear respectful, but invisible enough not to interfere with the image she was building around herself and Ryan. I closed the photo album slowly and looked around Frank's study. For the first time in months, I no longer felt uncertain about what was happening inside my own family. Uncertainty, I would later learn, can be far more dangerous than anger. The following Tuesday, I drove into downtown Napa for lunch with Daniel Reeves. The sky hung low and gray above the vineyards, and soft rain tapped against my windshield the entire drive. Daniel had been Frank's attorney for nearly 20 years, though calling him only an attorney felt inaccurate. He had witnessed birthdays, anniversaries, retirement parties, and eventually Frank's funeral. He knew the history of our family almost as well as we did. When I arrived at the restaurant, Daniel was already seated near the back corner in a navy suit with reading glasses balanced low on his nose while reviewing paperwork beside a cup of black coffee. He stood immediately when he saw me. "Helen," he said warmly, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "You look tired." "That makes 2 of us," I replied softly. We ordered lunch, but neither of us touched much of the food once it arrived. Daniel studied me quietly for a few moments before setting his fork down. "Emma called me after the wedding," he said carefully. I gave a small humorless smile. Word travels fast. Humiliation usually does. His honesty startled me more than sympathy would have. Most people avoided direct language when discussing painful things. Daniel never had. He folded his hands together. "I need to ask you something difficult, Helen. Have Ryan and Claire mentioned the house recently?" I leaned back slowly in my chair. "They came over 3 days ago to discuss retirement communities." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, like a man hearing confirmation of something he already suspected. "I thought so." A strange coldness settled in my chest. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what exactly is happening?" He reached into his leather briefcase and removed a thick folder filled with documents. About 6 months before Frank passed away, he updated several parts of the Parker family trust. My heart tightened hearing Frank's name spoken in present legal terms instead of memories. Daniel slid a document toward me. Frank became concerned after Ryan started discussing joint financial planning with Claire. I frowned slightly. Ryan has always handled investments responsibly. Ryan? Yes, Daniel replied carefully. Claire is another matter. Outside the restaurant window, rain streaked softly down the glass, while people hurried along the sidewalk carrying umbrellas. The world beyond the restaurant continued normally, while my entire understanding of the last few years slowly shifted beneath me. Daniel lowered his voice. Claire contacted my office twice after the engagement asking questions about property succession and trust distribution. Without Ryan? The first time, yes. The second time she implied Ryan was fully aware. I stared down at the paperwork in silence. And what did she want? Daniel hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. She wanted to know how quickly assets could transfer if you voluntarily relocated into assisted living. I felt something inside me go very still. Not angry, not emotional, simply still. Daniel continued carefully. Frank anticipated pressure like this eventually. That is why he structured the trust differently before he died. He slid another document across the table. Legally, the house remains entirely under your control, not Ryan's. I looked up sharply. Ryan believes the property automatically becomes his after my death. Eventually, yes, but only under specific conditions outlined by Frank. Daniel removed his glasses slowly. If there is evidence of coercion, manipulation, or attempts to force relocation for financial gain, Ryan can lose access to portions of the inheritance. Entirely. For several seconds, I could not speak. Frank knew. Somehow, somewhere near the end of his life, Frank had already seen pieces of this future coming together. The memory hit me suddenly. 2 weeks before he died, Frank had sat beside me on the back porch watching the sunset spill across the vineyard hills behind our property. He looked tired that evening. Older. Promise me something, he had said quietly. Do not let anyone make you feel unnecessary after I am gone. At the time, I thought grief was making him emotional. Now I realized he had been warning me. Daniel's voice pulled me gently back to the present. Helen, I need you to understand something clearly. You are not powerless here. I looked down at my untouched tea while Claire's polished smile drifted through my memory beside the image of that silver trash can at the wedding reception. For weeks, I had felt wounded, humiliated, slowly erased. But sitting there across from Daniel with Frank's carefully prepared documents spread across the table between us, another feeling quietly began replacing the hurt. Clarity. And clarity can become something very dangerous when people mistake your silence for weakness. Over the next several weeks, I became someone Claire no longer considered dangerous. It was surprisingly easy. I stopped correcting people when they repeated her version of events from the wedding. I answered Ryan's calls with a tired voice and mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the size of the house. I even asked Claire once whether the retirement community near Sonoma allowed small dogs, despite the fact that I had not owned a dog in 15 years. I watched satisfaction flicker behind her eyes before she carefully replaced it with concern. Of course, Helen, she said sweetly. They have wonderful amenities there. Wonderful amenities. The phrase sounded less like comfort and more like storage. Claire began visiting more often after that. Not out of affection, out of confidence. She walked through the house, taking subtle inventory while pretending to help me organize things. This antique mirror could be worth a fortune restored properly. People are paying ridiculous amounts for original hardwood flooring now. The kitchen would open beautifully if someone removed this wall. Someone. Not you. Not us. Someone. As though she had already mentally moved herself into every room. Ryan remained distracted most of the time, buried beneath conference calls and financial reports. But I noticed something important during those visits. Claire always answered questions directed at him before he could speak for himself. Ryan loves modern kitchens. Ryan thinks the upstairs rooms are unnecessary. Ryan agrees the property taxes are becoming unreasonable. Eventually, I stopped looking at Ryan during conversations altogether. The real decisions were not being made by my son anymore. They were being managed beside him. One Thursday afternoon, Claire arrived carrying iced coffees and a folder filled with glossy brochures from luxury retirement communities. She spread them neatly across my dining room table beneath the chandelier Frank installed himself 22 years ago. This one has watercolor classes and private wine tastings every Friday, she said brightly. And this community has transportation services into downtown Sonoma. I studied the photographs quietly. Elderly couples smiling beside swimming pools. Women with silver hair playing tennis beneath perfect California sunshine. Everything looked carefully staged, like expensive waiting rooms for people society wanted tucked away politely. Claire leaned forward sympathetically. You deserve to relax now, Helen. You have spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. It was almost impressive how beautifully she disguised removal as kindness. I smiled faintly. You are probably right. Her entire posture softened with relief. That single sentence gave her exactly what she wanted. Permission to stop pretending patience was difficult. A few minutes later, while she took a phone call outside on the back patio, I walked quietly into the kitchen for water and overheard part of her conversation through the open screen door. Honestly, sooner than we expected, Claire whispered with a small laugh. She is finally accepting reality. I stood completely still beside the kitchen counter while afternoon sunlight stretched across the tile floor. Once the move happens, Ryan wants to renovate almost immediately, she continued. The property value alone is insane. Ryan wants to renovate. Not we. Not someday. They were already discussing my home, like future owners waiting for paperwork to clear. I returned silently to the dining room before Claire came back inside. When she re-entered, her expression returned instantly to polished concern. Everything okay? She asked. Perfectly fine, I replied calmly. And for the first time since Frank died, I realized something important about grief. People assume sadness makes older women fragile. They mistake loneliness for helplessness. They assume quiet means surrender. Claire had spent years studying how to slowly erase me from family photographs, conversations, and eventually my own home. But what she never understood was this. Frank did not spend nearly 4 decades building a life beside a weak woman. That evening after Claire left, I drove to Daniel Reeves's office carrying 3 folders Frank had hidden in the study safe years earlier. Property records, trust amendments, financial authorizations. Daniel reviewed every page carefully while rain tapped softly against his office windows. Finally, he looked up at me over his reading glasses. Helen, he said slowly, if Ryan and Claire continue pressuring you toward relocation while discussing future control of the property, we may need to make certain legal protections immediate. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. Then let us make them immediate. Daniel watched me quietly for a long moment before giving a small nod. Frank would be very proud of you right now. I looked down at the signed paperwork resting beneath my fingertips. Strange thing about humiliation. If it cuts deeply enough, eventually the pain hardens into clarity. And clarity no longer asks permission to defend itself. 2 months later, Claire hosted what she called a casual little dinner party at my house. That wording alone told me everything I needed to know. Nobody describes an event with catered seafood towers, imported wine, and a valet stand in the driveway as casual. By 6 o'clock, luxury cars lined both sides of the street, while soft jazz floated through the open patio doors. Claire moved through the house wearing a fitted cream-colored dress, greeting guests like a woman already introducing people to her future property. Ryan followed behind carrying wine bottles and smiling politely at business clients from his investment firm. Every now and then, he would glance toward me with an expression I could no longer fully read. Guilt, perhaps, or simply discomfort. I wore a charcoal gray silk blouse and pearl earrings Frank bought me on our 30th anniversary. Simple, elegant, invisible enough not to threaten Claire's carefully staged evening. Helen, Claire called brightly from across the kitchen island. Could you help direct the caterers if they need anything? Not sit with the guests. Not welcome people into the home I had owned for over 3 decades. Help the staff. I smiled gently. Of course. The strange thing was that humiliations became easier to recognize once you stopped making excuses for them. Every detail that evening carried intention. Claire introduced me repeatedly as Ryan's mother, who still lives here for now. She laughed while saying it each time, always lightly enough that objecting would seem dramatic. At one point, I overheard one of Ryan's co-workers ask whether Claire and Ryan planned to renovate after the transition. Claire swirled wine inside her glass and smiled. Oh, definitely. We are thinking open concept downstairs. The house needs fresh energy. Fresh energy. As though Frank's memory and my entire adult life were simply outdated decor. I moved quietly through the dining room, collecting empty glasses while conversations drifted around me in polished little fragments. Investment portfolios, vacation homes in Aspen, private school waiting lists. People discussing millions of dollars while standing beneath the chandelier Frank installed with his own hands after saving for nearly a year. Then I heard Claire laugh softly near the fireplace. Honestly, Helen barely remembers where anything is anymore. Last week she forgot where she left her car keys for an entire afternoon. Several guests gave sympathetic, little smiles. One woman actually tilted her head toward me with pity. Pity, not respect, not warmth. Pity carefully curated by Claire, one small comment at a time. I set the tray of glasses down slowly on the dining table. My hands felt perfectly steady. Across the room, Ryan looked uncomfortable but remained silent while Claire continued speaking. We just worry about her living alone eventually, she added gently. At some point, people need support whether they want to admit it or not. Something inside me settled completely then. Not anger. Resolution. I walked calmly toward the center of the room while conversations gradually quieted around me. Claire noticed me approaching and immediately softened her expression into concern. Helen, are you okay? She asked sweetly. I smiled politely. Perfectly fine. Then I reached into my handbag and removed a large cream-colored envelope Daniel had prepared earlier that afternoon. The room became still enough to hear the ice shifting inside someone's whiskey glass. I handed the envelope directly to Ryan. What is this? He asked nervously. Legal documents, I replied calmly. Claire's smile flickered for the first time all evening. Ryan opened the envelope slowly while several guests pretended not to stare. His face lost color almost immediately as he scanned the first page. Mom, he whispered. Claire stepped closer beside him. Ryan. His eyes moved rapidly across the paperwork before finally lifting toward me in confusion. The trust was amended? I folded my hands peacefully in front of me. 6 weeks ago. Claire reached for the papers, reading faster now, her expression tightening with every page. Daniel had done exactly what Frank intended years earlier. Full property authority remained solely with me. Any attempt involving pressure, coercion, or financial manipulation toward relocation immediately suspended future inheritance access under the Parker Trust. Claire looked up sharply. This is ridiculous. Her polished voice cracked slightly on the final word. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ryan stared at her slowly. Claire, he said quietly, why would this even be included? Nobody answered. Immediately, outside, evening wind rustled softly through the vineyard trees while silence spread heavily through the room. Then Claire laughed nervously and tried to smile again. Frank was obviously just being overprotective. But for the first time since entering my home, Claire no longer looked confident. She looked exposed. I looked directly at my son. Your father understood something before either of us did, I said softly. People who truly love you never try to quietly remove you from your own life. And standing there beneath my chandelier while guests avoided eye contact, and Claire gripped those papers with trembling fingers, I finally realized something else too. Humiliation feels very different when it no longer belongs to you. The dinner party ended early after that. Guests gathered their coats with awkward smiles and half-finished goodbyes while avoiding direct eye contact with anyone in the room. Expensive perfume and untouched wine lingered in the air long after the front door closed behind the last couple. Claire stood motionless beside the fireplace, gripping the trust documents so tightly the edges had bent beneath her fingers. Ryan remained near the dining table, staring down at the paperwork like a man trying to reread reality itself. I quietly began collecting empty glasses from the coffee table. Strange how ordinary tasks become comforting during moments that change your life forever. Finally, Ryan looked up. Mom, he said slowly, why would Dad think anyone would pressure you? His voice sounded genuinely confused now. Not defensive, not irritated. Confused. Claire answered before I could speak. Frank was older and emotional when he changed the trust, she said quickly. People make irrational decisions when they are sick. I placed another wine glass onto the tray carefully before meeting her eyes. Your father spent 40 years designing commercial properties across California, I said calmly to Ryan. He was many things near the end of his life. Irrational was not one of them. Claire stepped closer toward Ryan. This whole thing is becoming unnecessarily dramatic. There it was again. Drama. That word people use whenever they want. Consequences to disappear quietly. Ryan rubbed one hand across his face. Claire, did you ask Daniel about the trust before the wedding? She hesitated only slightly. I was trying to help us plan responsibly. Without telling me, I knew you would overreact. Ryan stared at her for several seconds with an expression I had not seen on his face in years. Doubt. Real doubt. Claire noticed it too because her tone softened immediately. Ryan, your mother is twisting things to make me look manipulative. I almost smiled hearing that. After months of carefully disguised humiliation, Claire finally sounded rattled enough to abandon elegance. My phone buzzed softly against the kitchen counter. A message from Emma. Check your email before you sleep. I said nothing and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Claire continued speaking rapidly now, trying to regain control of the conversation. We have done nothing except worry about her future. She lives alone in a massive house and forgets things constantly. Ryan frowned slightly. What things? Claire blinked once. What? You said she forgets things constantly. His voice sharpened subtly. What things? Silence spread briefly across the room. Claire looked toward me before answering too carefully. Small things. Normal aging things. Ryan's expression shifted again. Tiny changes. Tiny cracks. But enough. I recognized them immediately because Frank used to wear the exact same expression whenever he realized somebody was being dishonest during business negotiations. That night, after Ryan and Claire finally left, I sat alone in the study with a cup of tea and opened Emma's email. Attached was a short video clip recorded accidentally during the wedding reception. The camera angle shook slightly, as though Emma had started filming without realizing the audio was already recording. Claire's voice drifted clearly through the speakers. No, seriously, she laughed quietly to one of the bridesmaids. If Helen sits near the front, every picture is going to look like we invited somebody's grandmother from a retirement ad. Another woman laughed softly. Then Claire added the sentence that made me close my eyes slowly. The trash can was Ryan's idea originally, but I made them cover it so it would look classy. For a long moment, I simply sat there listening to rain tap softly against the windows while the recording replayed in my mind. Not because it hurt anymore. That part was already over. What I felt now was something colder. Understanding. Ryan knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not how far Claire intended to go. But he knew enough to stay silent while I was humiliated publicly in front of hundreds of people. The next morning, my phone rang just after 8. Ryan. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice sounded rough, exhausted. Mom, I need to ask you something honestly. I stood near the kitchen window watching fog drift across the vineyard hills behind the house. All right. He hesitated. Did Claire ever say anything to you directly? About wanting the house? I thought about the wedding. The retirement brochures. The dinner party. The careful little comments disguised as concern. No, I answered quietly. Claire never says the cruel part directly. That is what makes people like her dangerous. Ryan said nothing for several seconds. Then finally, very softly, I heard him whisper something I never expected from my son again. I think I made a terrible mistake. Almost a year later, I returned to the same vineyard in Napa Valley where Ryan's wedding had taken place. The evening air carried the scent of lavender and wine barrels while golden string lights glowed softly above rows of polished tables arranged across the terrace. But this time, I was not standing quietly at the edge of someone else's celebration wondering where I belonged. This time, the event existed because of me. The Parker Family Foundation Charity Gala had become one of the largest annual fundraising events supporting housing programs for widowed women across Northern California. Daniel stood near the entrance greeting donors while Emma supervised volunteers arranging auction items inside the main reception hall. She looked radiant in a dark emerald dress, confident in a way that reminded me painfully of the woman I used to be before grief and humiliation nearly convinced me to disappear. You, nervous? Emma asked softly as she adjusted the silver bracelet on her wrist. I smiled faintly. At my age, nerves become expensive. I try not to waste them. She laughed quietly and linked her arm through mine while we walked toward the terrace together. The vineyard looked almost identical to the night of Ryan's wedding. The same hills rolling beneath the fading California sunset. The same white floral arrangements swaying gently in the evening breeze. But somehow everything felt different now. Perhaps because humiliation only has power while you are still asking permission to belong somewhere. My seat sat directly at the center table beside the stage. Elegant ivory cushions, crystal glassware, fresh orchids arranged carefully beside the place card that read Helen Parker in gold lettering. No covered trash cans, No whispers. No pity. Just respect quietly earned back piece by piece over the hardest year of my life. Guests approached throughout the evening to shake my hand and thank me for supporting the foundation. Some recognized me from Frank's years in business. Others simply knew the story of a widow who rebuilt herself after discovering how easily family can mistake kindness for weakness. Ryan arrived nearly 20 minutes after the gala began. Alone. I noticed him standing near the terrace entrance before he noticed me. He looked older than he had a year earlier. Not physically older exactly, just worn in places success cannot hide. The divorce from Claire had finalized 3 months earlier after Daniel uncovered unauthorized attempts to leverage trust-related assets during the marriage. Ryan lost money, reputation, friends who quietly drifted away once the polished image around his marriage collapsed. But none of that seemed to weigh on him as heavily as regret did. He approached my table slowly while guests continued chatting around us beneath the soft music drifting through the vineyard. "Mom," he said quietly. I looked up at him calmly. "Ryan." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his eyes moved toward the empty chair beside mine. "Is someone sitting there?" he asked. I glanced briefly at the untouched place sitting beside me before answering. "No." He nodded slowly but did not sit down. That was the thing about guilt. Sometimes people punish themselves long after everyone else stops trying to. Ryan looked around the terrace carefully. "You did all this?" "No," I replied softly. "I survived all this. There is a difference." His eyes lowered briefly. "I still think about that night sometimes." I knew exactly which night he meant. Not the divorce papers. Not the legal meetings. The wedding. The trash can. The moment a son allowed silence to become betrayal. "So do I admitted. Ryan swallowed hard before speaking again. "I should have stopped it." The vineyard lights reflected softly against the wine glasses between us, while distant laughter floated through the evening air. A year ago, that sound would have reminded me of humiliation. Now it simply sounded like life continuing. "Yes," I said gently. "You should have." He nodded once, accepting the truth without defending himself this time. Somewhere beyond the terrace, the auction host invited guests toward the ballroom as applause echoed softly through the vineyard. Ryan glanced toward the empty chair again before finally looking back at me. "Do you think someday you could forgive me?" I studied my son quietly. The same blue eyes Frank had. The same nervous habit of rubbing his thumb against his wedding band finger even after the ring was gone. My child. My heartbreak. My greatest lesson. Then I looked toward the chair beside me. Empty. Waiting. No longer reserved for people who believed they were entitled to it. "Forgiveness," I said softly, "is very different from forgetting where someone once tried to make you